Previously, I mentioned that when I moved to Alberta, I discovered a group called the Alberta Aurora Chasers. One of the names that would appear almost every day in that group was Chris Ratzlaff. You could tell by his online presence and dedication that he must be one of the admins of the group, and sure enough, he was. Without really thinking about it or having a plan, I messaged him on February 9th, 2021, asking if I could film him for a documentary I wanted to create eventually. He messaged me back within 4 hours and said yes. 2 years later, I messaged him again and told him that it's happening. Are you down? And again, his response was yes. Chris invited me over to his house so we could sit down and get to know each other. There were two main things I wanted to know. One, his story about the Alberta Aurora Chasers group, and two, to hear more about the process of seeing the aurora near the Calgary area and throughout Alberta.
My name is Chris Ratzlaff. I am, 49 years old. I work in the software industry by day, and by night I help manage the Alberta Aurora Chasers community. My role in the Alberta Aurora Chasers group is as a community builder, setting the tone for the group, helping guide the group towards sharing information about photography, about aurora chasing, and to not gatekeep that kind of knowledge, to share that knowledge as broadly as possible. And I was one of the founding members in 2012 and have been with that group in this role almost that entire time. The first time I saw aurora was actually when I was probably a teenager. I would have been about 16 or 17, coming home from hanging out with some friends in the evening, and I saw it covering the entire sky. At that time, I had no idea what I was looking at. It certainly didn't match what I was expecting aurora to look like. For me, aurora chasing started with storm chasing. I started chasing storms 2010, 2011, and then I realized in the winter times that, without storms to chase in the winter, it's handy to have some other way to occupy my time. Aurora chasing fills that void. Aurora chasing is so much like storm chasing. Aurora chasing, you can be in one place, but you still have to figure out when the aurora is going to happen and when you might be able to see it from southern Alberta. There's a game, I guess, involved in seeing the aurora. And that's the passion for me, is understanding what's going on, being able to look forward, being able to anticipate in 20 days, this might happen. In 3 days, there's a higher probability of this happening. And this evening, maybe we're going to see the thing. Maybe we're going to actually have the event that we're looking for. A lot of the passion around aurora is, I guess there's a couple of different things. One is just the experience of being out there and seeing the northern lights, seeing the aurora, seeing it happen. And that's kind of twofold, right? There's the bit of seeing that magic and just what the sky can do is really amazing. There's the mystery as well as the science kind of balancing together, right? The other side of aurora that I really appreciate is the community. Growing that community, that sense of helping people who've never seen the aurora be able to see it. And when you're in southern Alberta, so many people don't realize that that's even an opportunity for them. There's a couple million people in this province who could see the aurora but never have, simply because they don't know when to go out and look for it. When someone on the community says, I've seen aurora for the first time, that's awesome. For Alberta, aurora can be seen across the province, and not terribly uncommonly as well. Probably at least once every month or two, you could see aurora from anywhere in the province. With a stronger event, you could see aurora south of Canada. In a very uncommon event, something that occurs maybe once a century, you can see aurora even further south. Aurora has been seen from the southern United States, but that's a very, very strong aurora, and that's the kind of thing that we don't typically see very often. So my aurora chasing process really starts by watching the sun. And it starts by looking at the sun a month in advance of when I might be able to see aurora. I'm looking at what happened last month. So if we had a coronal hole last month, there's a good chance that we might see that coronal hole occur again in about 27 days. So that's where my process starts, about a month in advance. And I'm looking to see what could occur in the next 3 or 4 weeks with a very low probability, a very low anticipation that that's actually going to happen. But what might happen. And then as we get closer to a time frame where we might be able to see aurora, I'm looking to see what's happening on the sun a few days in advance of that part of the sun facing Earth. So is there a coronal hole starting to come onto the front of the sun? Are there solar flares that might be possible through sunspots? Is that a possibility coming towards us? Are they in the right place? Are they going to be facing Earth? What's the chance that they're actually going to send something in our direction? With the coronal hole, there's a pretty good chance. With a solar flare, we're waiting for that pop to happen with an associated coronal mass ejection facing in our direction. That's about 3 days in advance of the actual event, and then we spend that time waiting, hoping, second guessing, and watching for any kind of indication that coronal mass ejection or that enhanced solar wind might be coming our way. There's a lot of skepticism on my part. You'll see me a lot of times being like, it's not going to happen. We're not going to see the aurora. And then we start watching the solar wind data on some of the spacecraft that are just upwind from Earth. And we start looking for signs of increased speed in the solar wind. We start looking for signs of the magnetic field being negatively charged, which will then, those two combined are a pretty good indication of that aurora might be possible. And then you start getting excited. You start thinking, oh, it's actually going to happen. And you start anticipating what is the level of strength that we're going to see. Is it going to be on the horizon? Is it going to be kind of halfway up the sky, or is it going to be overhead? And those are very different experiences with aurora. In a lot of ways, a more reliable event is what's called a coronal hole. Coronal hole is an area on the sun with that's not really holding back the solar wind as strongly. So it's sort of like an opening in the surface of the sun where solar wind is coming out at a much higher velocity than normal. And that hole is rotating around the sun. If you are Earth, the hole kind of start over here and start rotating this way, and as it faces us, it's sending this stream of solar wind out towards the planet. And that hole can persist for multiple rotations. The sun takes about 27 days to rotate, and those holes can persist several rotations of the sun, which is nice because they kind of give us a way to anticipate what might happen a month from now. In some ways, we can kind of extrapolate that with vastly decreasing confidence out 2 or 3 months, but very little confidence out that far. And when we've got that enhanced solar wind coming out of this coronal hole, that's suggesting to us that there's a good chance for aurora. We have elevated solar wind speeds, and we're hoping for a negatively oriented or southward BZ, and that can give us an aurora experience for a couple nights, a night or two sometimes. In a lot of ways, you can get a longer experience out of a coronal hole than out of a coronal mass ejection or a solar flare associated event, which can be very much more tightly compressed. So there's two websites that I like to use for space weather data. One is called Space Weather Live. The other one is called SolarHam. The difference between the two is how they present the data. They all present the same data. SolarHam presents data in a way that is almost like a dashboard. It gives you as much information as it can, and it's all there in one spot. Space Weather Live kind of condenses it all down into that sort of little chunk of screen that I can see everything at a glance. What they both do really nicely is capture that data coming from the NASA and NOAA spacecraft, the ACE spacecraft as well as the Discovery spacecraft in particular. Those two are sitting out toward the sun, between Earth and the sun. They're about 90 minutes up solar wind from us. And those two satellites capture elements, they measure elements of the space weather of the solar wind coming into Earth that we use to really understand what the aurora might do. And through that, we're really looking at the solar wind, the speed of the solar wind, the strength of the interplanetary magnetic field, as well as the orientation of the interplanetary magnetic field. Those two are BT and BZ, respectively. So when we're talking about the data, we're talking about the speed of the solar wind, we're talking about the magnetic orientation of the solar wind. Those two are kind of part and parcel important to each other. Certainly the most important bit is the magnetic field orientation, the BZ. If you've got BZ that is negatively oriented, that's oriented south, it's creating an opening in the Earth's magnetic field to let those charged particles, to bring those charged particles into the planet. And once we've got that happening, we're able to start basically charging up the aurora. And the reason why BZ can be more important than the solar wind speed, if you've got a really long period of south-oriented solar wind, you can take that long period of time to charge up the aurora. If you've got a really fast solar wind, you can do it in less time. You can have a shorter period of negative BZ, of south-facing BZ, and you can get the aurora to charge up a little bit quicker. But we have seen times where we've got a very slow solar wind, a very long period of negative BZ, negative magnetic field orientation, and we've gotten unexpected aurora as a result of that. And then you start thinking about where you're going to go. Aurora is everywhere. Everywhere. Aurora is all around you when it's in your area. You could see the same view within a 100-kilometer radius. So you start planning, where am I going to head to? Am I going to head up to the mountains? Am I going to head into the prairies? Where are the clouds? That's another big aspect. There's nothing worse than having an amazing aurora display and then realizing that you're clouded out and the nearest clear sky is 3 or 4 hours away from you. And then you start doing that ROI calculation. Am I going to drive for 4 hours to see this event? Is this event going to be something that I'm willing to invest that much time into? So it's a lot. There's a lot in the process.
So to summarize and simplify how to use Space Weather Live, you want to pay attention to 3 things. 1, the BZ. The BZ needs to be reading south, and when that happens, the line on the graph will appear red. Number 2, color code. Space Weather Live uses different colors to let you know when the data is at its least intense and when it's at its most intense. Green is when it's at its least, and then it goes to yellow, and then it changes to orange, and then it'll be at red for its most intense. 3, by joining the official Alberta Aurora Chasers Facebook group and looking for the daily thread. Whenever there's a chance of aurora, a group member will post what's called an official thread. On this official thread, people from the community will start commenting either locations, and sometimes they'll post pictures or videos of the real-time aurora, what's going on in front of their eyes. And they usually include the location if they post a photo or video. This is a good way of just sitting back at home and looking at where the aurora is active and seeing if there's clouds in the sky or not. The disadvantage to this is that by the time you get to that location, depending on where you live, you might miss the show. So it's always better to learn the data yourself, know the signs of when to go out, and eventually through experience you will start to know when it's worth it for you. A lot of the time, aurora chasing is a gamble, so you'll have to just go out anyways, and that's part of the fun, and that's part of the process. Speaking of going out, there's a saying that was started in the group, and that saying is
Pants on. Pants on is a comment that started with Richard Dunstan. He one night he was saying, I think there's going to be aurora. I've got one leg in my pants. That's sort of the story that it originates from. And from there, that kind of became code for, I think there's going to be aurora. And we play on it in various different ways, right? I will rarely say pants on because I'm kind of an uncommittal person in the group. I won't say that there's going to be aurora tonight until there's actually aurora tonight. I'll usually say, I think there's like an 80% chance of aurora, or I think there's maybe a 30% chance of aurora tonight. Usually I'm kind of more in that lower forecast bucket. So I will almost never say pants on, but I might post a photo of my pants by the door. Like I'm ready to put my pants on, right? So I'll be suggestive. Other people will say, yeah, I've totally got my pants on. I'm out the door already as we speak. And it's kind of like a community lingo that definitely, it's the claim to fame there absolutely goes to Richard Dunstan.
After hearing about pants on, I knew there was one more popular topic that gets brought up in the group a lot,